The sickness arc is fine in The Walking Dead. You guys just over exaggerate. Alright, guys, this is my favorite season. But let me clarify something. It's my favorite season because it isn't my favorite season. Now just put yourself in the position that you have just watched the greatest TV of all time. I mean, you absolutely cannot, you cannot fathom how good what you just watched is. It's like your two eyes just had sex and they had an orgasm 16 times. And then somehow, by some God-sent, Satan-helped miracle, the next season it's somehow just it's all right. Let's jump right into the bias. 30 Days Without an Accident is the best premiere so far in The Walking Dead. Now, when I say this episode is better than Days Gone By, I don't mean it in the aspect of like it does what that episode was trying to do better. They both have very different purposes. Like, they're trying to do completely different things. But I do prefer 30 Days Without an Accident over Days Gone By. So let's explain why. First off, we get a little peek into the sickness arc that will be taking place from episodes 2 through 5. The supply run has some good action. It is surprisingly funny at the start where, Zach is trying to guess what Daryl did before the turn. Tyrese and Sasha have their little sibling banter. And what I consider to be the biggest pro of this episode is the Rick adventure. Because it starts the whole thing that never leaves the show. And that is the topic of being too far gone in the zombie apocalypse. As we see throughout the rest of the show, and as we've already seen in seasons 1 through 3, survivors have to do things that they typically would not be acceptable in our current world and would probably scar somebody. And the question comes up, if you get to come back, you get to be a person again after committing such horrible things just to stay alive. And the woman embodies this perfectly, as she is in fact too far gone. She tries to kill Rick even though Rick offers her asylum. She thinks her husband is still alive when he's a walker. It just embodies everything of what I've just said. Then it gets better with that end talk with Rick and Hershel. Hey, by the way, I know I didn't bring up Hershel a lot in the last video, which was a big mistake. But Hershel is hands down in the top 3 best things of seasons 3 and 4. And he's in the top 5 best characters of The Walking Dead of all time. And just Hershel's presence in this show is one of the best things of all time. Alright, this is when the sickness arc starts. And like I said, this sickness arc isn't bad. And this season is the second best Walking Dead season in my opinion. I do have to say that the sickness arc, while being good, there's not really much to say about it. It's just kind of horror action kind of. So I do believe I will be zooming through most of these episodes, and this is one of them. The prison breach scene is fire, and like I said, this is where the whole sickness thing starts. They figure out what happens. They find out a little too quick, but it's not really a problem. Episode 3, Isolation. Favorite parts of this episode, or the pros of this episode? Rick versus Tyrese. This happens in the comics too, but it's for different reasons. If it was a comic accurate show, probably would happen in season 3. Look at me! No! Look at me! And in this episode and the next episode, we get this little adventure with Daryl, Michonne, Bob, and Tyrese. And this is where it starts, and I really like it. And we also get a Terminus reference somewhere in the episode with a radio. Also, the biggest pro of this episode is Carol is now in her badass arc, which she leaves at around season 10 when she just becomes a regular person again. But yeah, Carol kills Karen and David, 2 characters that aren't really that important, but she kills them. Carol ends up getting banished from the prison for killing 2 of their own, even though it was for good reasons. We continue the whole Daryl, Michonne, Tyrese, Bob trying to find medicine arc. And Bob is kind of a scumbag. We see it later on in the episode. And this whole Rick and Carol stuff is cool, but here we have our first actual con of this season, and it's that this one couple shows up. Now, them as characters, they're whatever, they're your standard Walking Dead meant to die characters. But I just think that this whole Rick and Carol stuff, them going out and then Rick eventually banishing Carol, it should have just centered around them two. I don't like the fact that these two characters get shoved in there for no actual like explainable reason. They're just there so we could have characters, and then one of them dies and then the other one dies later on. So I think this episode would overall be a lot higher in terms of rating if it was just a Rick and Carol adventure instead of them recruiting but not really recruiting two random people that we barely meet. Now we have our closing to the sickness arc, and the star of this episode, Herschel, of course. Herschel and Carl.
Damn!
And yeah, this episode is really intense. I really like that they had us on the edge of our seat with this whole sickness thing. Like, I really thought Glenn was gonna die here, guys. Well, if I hadn't known that he survives, because I started watching during the second half of this season, I probably would have thought he would have actually died. Then at the end of this episode, we get our first actual look of the governor. Now we resume our whole governor arc that closed at the end of season 3, but not really closed. And now that I look at it like this, I guess I could see why the Walking Dead community doesn't like the sickness arc. Because, you know, like, you finish season 3, then you go into this one, then you have to wait 5 weeks to, you know, catch up with the governor again. But I mean, you know, like, it's whatever, guys. I like how this is a massive twist because it gives us a glimpse into the governor's psychology. It's also really interesting because we see something from the governor that we've never actually seen before in the show, and that doesn't even slightly exist in the comics, and that's his humanity. We see him actually care for people in this episode. And it's honestly kind of heartwarming, but kind of confusing, you know, like, is he actually going to stay like this? No, he's a bad guy. Yeah. Dead Weight is a pretty good episode. I think out of this whole like cluster or this whole first half of season 4, this is probably the second or third best episode there, guys. I do really think the best part of this episode is seeing the governor move up the ranks, you know, as he kills Martinez and that other guy, and at the end he does eventually become the leader. Alright, let's move on to the first 10 out of 10 episode of The Walking Dead. You guys, there's nothing wrong with this episode. Like, there is genuinely nothing wrong with this episode. This episode couldn't have cons even if I tried to find it. Now, it does suffer from one thing that I will bitch about in later episodes, so I should clear it up now before, you know, you guys see me complain about those things in later seasons, and then you're like, but you didn't complain about it in this episode. And that is that, the disadvantages that shows have over movies is that shows cut to commercial. So, like, when you come back from commercial, sometimes the story you were following isn't the one you see after commercial, because there's A plots and B plots in shows. And here we see that with Lily and her daughter, the whole mud thing. But I don't know, like, it's not bad, okay? And I think it's because seeing the governor's reaction to Megan being dead and how he just shoots her, and how Lily sees that he truly, like, he truly has no emotion. He's truly too far gone, which is probably one of the biggest pros of this episode. We see that the governor is truly too far gone. This guy doesn't care about saving people, doesn't care about resources, survival. He just wants to see this group dead because they made him look weak. The governor is the perfect example of just insanity and psychopathy just like rolled up into one person during a zombie apocalypse. This guy does not care. Next up, the action in this episode is, like I said last video, this is the true first biggest action set piece in this whole show. And it's not the biggest, but it's the first. The tank blowing up the prison, them driving the tank through the fence, the tank doing this, the tank doing that, the tank. And Rick's speech to the governor's group about how no one is too far gone, you can come back from the things you've done, is kind of the cherry on top of this amazing episode. A Rick speech is like an Optimus Prime speech in a Transformers movie. And separating everyone is a really good decision, especially in the zombie apocalypse show. Them finding each other is the best part of the second half of this season. And our final pro is that Michonne kills the governor. I think Michonne should have been the one to kill the governor. I know Rick killing him would have been cool, but it makes sense for Michonne to be the one to kill him. Alright, the follow-up after obviously isn't better. Like, a 10 out of 10 episode is really rare in any show. But like I said last video, this is the first Walking Dead episode I ever saw. This episode will always have just the biggest. This episode takes up 50% of the space in the blood of my heart. I mean, even without knowing what this episode actually was about, I got hooked onto The Walking Dead like this. This episode is still, in my opinion, at least a top 15 Walking Dead episode of all time. Actual pros are just the misery of this episode. This is a Carl-centric episode. Carl definitely is the main character of this episode. Not even being biased here, this episode would be a 10 out of 10, but the Michonne stuff is just alright. Like, I wouldn't cut it out of the episode if I had the choice, but I think it's just alright. They could have done some better things with it, in my opinion. And this is where we meet our good friends Rosita, Abraham, and Eugene, some of the 3 best additions to the Walking Dead cast. And now, instead of just back and back, we have everybody here. We have Glenn, Rick, Carl, Michonne, Abraham, Eugene, whatever. That Rick fight scene in the restroom and him sneaking around the house that the Claimers have invaded. Pretty cool scene. Carl and Michonne really do have a good best friend sort of arc. I do like the fact that they don't push this whole mother-son thing with them two, because, you know, Michonne and Rick end up getting together. And finally, the Glenn stuff is nice. He wants to find Maggie. Abraham calls him an idiot. They fight. Eugene blows up the truck. And yeah, this is a solid-ass episode. Alright, I think this is probably the episode that people hate the most in this whole season. I could see why. It's definitely my least favorite, but I still really do like it a lot. Good sibling dynamic, you know. Daryl is the big brother, Beth is the little sister. And in this episode, our follow-up to the Daryl and Beth stuff is that Beth gets stolen, and the stuff with Maggie, Bob, Sasha is super cool. Alright, this episode is surprisingly good, because if I'm being honest, if you were to show me the plot for every episode before I saw it, I'd probably tell you in my predictions that this one will probably be the worst, but it really isn't. This episode is honestly really disturbing and really depressing. It's pretty much a remix of something that happens in the comic books that I won't spoil because I think you guys should really read them. And the fact that here it's more fleshed out and made to be more creepy is something that I really like. And also another pro is that Carol confesses. For a quick second, I thought we would have a quick fight scene of Carol and Tyrese and then one of them probably dies. But no, it's just like a very dark scene. Then the both girls die. Thankfully not Judith. I feel like it would have been really ballsy to kill Judith in this episode. Guys, I feel like I've been going a little too fast. I'm kind of just zooming through the script. But anyways, here is the second to last episode. Oh shit. Oh. By the way, Daryl met the Claimers in episode 13 alone. I literally put an arrow because I put that as a pro for this episode, but then I forgot that it happened at the end of episode 13, and I forgot again. I didn't read that arrow. So yeah, in a pro that we'll add to episode 13 is that he meets the Claimers, and a pro this episode is Daryl and the Claimers. Daryl really earns their respect, and this whole outside cat trying to be an inside cat speech by Joe is kind of a little too good. I like the writing of The Walking Dead, but the fact that at some point at least every character has spit out some philosophical masterpiece kind of throws me off a little, not gonna lie. Also, Glenn, Rosita, Eugene, Abraham, Tara, Maggie, Sasha, and Bob are a highlight. Glenn and Maggie get reunited, by the way, and Abraham, Eugene, and Rosita kind of just cement themselves into this group. Alright guys, now we have the season finale, and what's it called? I need to clear up something, okay, for the next video's sake. I said in the beginning of this video that season 5 is better than this one, and yeah, it is. But the thing is, this season has 2 10 out of 10 episodes, and season 5 has one 10 out of 10 episode, which would probably throw you off because, you'd be like, what? So then how's that season better? It's because every episode in that season is a 9 out of 10, for the exception of literally like 2 episodes, which means that the overall score would be higher since every episode is a 9 out of 10. While this season is really good, most episodes are 8s. So yeah, let's get into this other 10 out of 10 episode. This is of course the rebirth of Rick Grimes, or the new birth of the new Rick Grimes. He just goes crazy. I mean, tends to happen when you threaten his son with. The prison flashbacks are also really sweet, but not only are they sweet, they serve an actual purpose. It's to show how different things are in just the span of about a couple weeks. Everything truly has fallen apart in these past episodes since the prison fell apart, and Rick going crazy is honestly just the start. Rick and Daryl have sort of been becoming friends, best friends, since season 2, and this is the episode where Rick calls Daryl his brother, and they go from best friends to brothers. From here on out, they will either refer to each other as brothers or they'll just act like brothers. And a pro that was also a pro in the previous episode in this season and the previous episode in the previous video, obviously Carl and Michonne. Like I said, their best friend arc is just over the top in a good way. Their conversations about monsters and the type of people they are and how they're not proud of it honestly goes really incredibly deep. And the whole Terminus plot twist of them being cannibals works way too well. And this is the perfect cliffhanger. Alright guys, these are the scores. Read them yourself, okay? I'm fucking sick. I am done, okay? I'm not gonna edit an extra 3 minutes of me fangirling over the next season. Goodbye.